My name is Earl McKenna, and I've spent more than 50 years on these waters, from the cold coasts of New England to the murky depths of the Gulf. I've seen things that would make a grown man question his sanity, and I've kept most of them locked away in the back of my mind like old fishing nets tangled in a corner of the shed. But this one story, the one about the giant of the chains, well, that one won't let me rest. Today, I'm going to tell you everything. It started on a November night in 1987. I remember the year because it was the same season my wife Sarah had passed 2 years prior. November always brought that heaviness back, the kind that settles in your bones like fog over the harbor. I was 53 then, still strong enough to haul nets all day, still stubborn enough to believe I had plenty of good years left in me. That particular evening, I was at McGillicuddy's Tavern, the same place I'd been going to since 1965. The wood-paneled walls smelled of salt, cigarette smoke, and old stories. Behind the bar was Tommy, pouring whiskey like it was water, and scattered around the worn tables were the usual crowd, fishermen, drifters, and men with nothing left to lose but their dignity. We were talking about the usual thing. The catch had been poor that season, the nets were wearing thin, and the younger fellas didn't have the stomach for real fishing anymore. Then old Hector Delgado, a man who must have been in his 80s with a face like driftwood, started talking about the legend. The giant of the chains, he called it. According to him, there was a fish, a creature really, that lived somewhere out in the deeper waters about 20 miles off the coast. No one had ever caught it. No one had ever even properly seen it. The stories went back generations. My grandfather told me, Hector said, his voice rough as gravel, that this thing, whatever it is, can pull 3 nets at once. 3 nets, full-grown men on the other end, and it drags them down like they weigh nothing. I remember laughing. I actually laughed out loud. "Hector, you're full of it," I said, nursing my bourbon. "There's no fish big enough to do that. Not here, not anywhere." "That's what I thought, too," he replied, fixing me with those rheumy old eyes, until I almost caught it myself. 1962, had 3 nets in the water, just like always, and something grabbed hold of all 3 at once. I felt it, McKenna. Felt it like it was alive, like it thinking. The tavern got quiet. Even Tommy stopped wiping down glasses. "What happened?" someone asked. "I cut the lines," Hector said. "Cut every damn one of them. Lost a fortune in nets and rope, but I kept my life, and I never went back out there again. Not after that." I didn't believe him. Not then. But something about that night felt different. Maybe it was the way the wind was howling outside McGillicuddy's, rattling the windows like it wanted in. Maybe it was the strange green quality to the sky. I stepped outside around. A color I'd never seen before, not in all my years in the water. The air tasted like salt. I drove down to the harbor. My boat, the Sarah's Memory, was tied up at her usual mooring. I'd named her after my wife, and in some ways that boat was the only family I had left. I stood on the dock for a long time, just looking at her, listening to the water slap against the pilings with a rhythm that felt almost like a heart. That's when I knew I was going out, right then, in the middle of the night, with that strange green sky and that copper taste in my mouth. Every instinct I had screaming at me not to. But there was something else, too. Something deeper. Something that pulled at me the same way the tide pulls at the moon. It was like the sea itself was calling my name. I boarded the Sarah's Memory and started the engine. As I pulled away from the dock, I didn't look back. I pointed the bow toward open water, toward the deep places the continental shelf drops off like a cliff. The engine rumbled beneath me, steady and reliable, and I thought about Hector's words. I felt it like it was alive, like it was thinking. By the time I reached the fishing grounds, maybe an hour out, the sky had turned the color of old bruises, purple and black, with that eerie green still lingering at the horizon. The water was calm in a way that felt unnatural, too calm, like something was holding its breath. I prepared 3 nets that night. I don't know why. 3. I'd never worked with 3 nets alone before, smart fishing, but my hands moved like they had their own mind, like someone else was guiding them. I baited the hooks, squid and herring, checked every knot twice, and secured the lines with extra care. As I stood there on the deck, looking out at that impossible calm water, I heard something, not with my ears exactly, but somewhere deeper. It was almost like a whisper, carried on the wind, but there was no wind. It sounded like it might have been a name, a woman's name. I couldn't quite make it. That's when I knew with absolute certainty something was waiting for me, and I was going to lower those nets. I don't know how long I stood there before I finally moved. Minutes? Hours? Time feels different out on the water, and especially when something's wrong. The Sarah's memory bobbed gently beneath my feet, and I could feel the thrumming of the engine through the soles of my boots. The air was so thick you could almost chew it. I lowered the first net. The rope slid through my hand smooth and easy, just like always. I watched it disappear into that dark water, watched the floats bob along the surface marking its path. Nothing unusual. The second net followed, then the third. I'd secured them all to the cleats, tied them off good and tight. Now, all I could do was wait and watch. The waiting was the worst part. I sat in the captain's chair with a thermos of coffee that had gone cold hours ago, and I stared out at the water. The stars were gone now, hidden behind that bruised sky. My watch said it was 2:47 a.m. I remember that exactly because I kept checking it, like time might somehow be moving back. Then I felt it, not sudden. It wasn't like a strike on a fishing line. It was more like a presence, like something vast had just opened its eyes somewhere beneath the boat. The water around me shifted, not waves exactly, but a displacement, like the whole ocean was taking a breath and exhaling all at once. I stood up so fast I knocked over the coffee thermos. "Easy, Earl," I said to myself. "Just a big fish, that's all." But I didn't believe it. The first net jerked. Not a gentle tug, a pull. The rope burned against the cleat, and I heard it creak in protest. I moved toward it, but before I could reach the rope, the second net jerked too. Then the third, all 3, all at once. "No," I whispered. "No, no, no." I grabbed the first rope, trying to haul it in, but it was like trying to pull the anchor off a cargo ship. The rope was vibrating in my hands, actually vibrating, and I could feel something moving beneath the surface, something big, not just big, huge, impossibly huge. The second net line snapped taut, and the third one followed a second later. All 3 were being pulled down, down, down into the dark. The ropes burned my palms as I tried to hold them, and I made the split-second decision to secure them better to the cleats. I wrapped them twice around the metal posts, using every bit of strength I had. That's when the Sarah's memory started to tilt. The boat wasn't large, about 35 feet, but she was sturdy. I'd maintained her for 30 years. I knew every inch of her, every creak and groan. But this tilt wasn't natural. This was something pulling the bow down, dragging the stern up toward the black sky. The deck shifted beneath my feet, and I had to grab the rail to keep from sliding. "Come on," I gasped, bracing myself. "Come on, hold." One of the ropes snapped just like that. The sound was like a gunshot, and the sudden release of tension threw me backward. My shoulder hit the cabin wall hard enough to knock the wind out of me. I gasped for air, my eyes watering, and forced myself to look at what was happening. 2 ropes left, still pulling, still dragging. The boat tilted further. Water started washing over the starboard rail. Cold water, so cold it felt like knives. I scrambled toward the ropes, thinking maybe I could cut them. Maybe I could release the nets. Whatever was down there would go away. But as I reached the cleats, the ropes vibrated with such violence that teeth chattered, and then I heard it. The water, not a whale's, not anything I'd ever heard before. It was deep and resonant. The earth itself was moaning. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. It vibrated through the hull of the Sarah's memory, through my bones, through the very air I was breathing. The boat tilted more. My instruments slid across the console, crashing to the deck. The coffee thermos rolled past my feet and disappeared over the rail into the black water. I made a decision. I pulled out my knife, a good steel knife my father had given me 60 years before, and I cut. I cut the first remaining rope, then the second. The lines whipped away like they'd been released from a catapult, disappearing into the darkness, and the boat suddenly righted itself so fast I fell to my knees. I was gasping, shaking. My hands were bleeding from the rope burns, and my shoulder throbbed where it had hit the cabin wall. The Sarah's memory bobbed gently, as if nothing had happened. The water was calm again, that impossible, unnatural calm. But it wasn't over. The water began to glow. At first, I thought I was imagining a faint phosphorescence rising from the depths, but it grew brighter, spreading out in a circle around my greenish-blue light. Cold, alien. It lit up the surface of the water like someone switched on a light beneath the ocean floor. And then I saw it. I saw the shape. It was massive. Even seeing just the outline, just the suggestion of it in that eerie glow, I could tell it was bigger than my boat. Bigger than any fish had a right to be. It moved beneath the surface, slowly, deliberately, and I swear on everything I hold sacred, that I heard that whisper again, that woman's name, carried on air that wasn't moving. Sarah. It had whispered Sarah. The glow lasted for maybe 10 seconds. Then it faded, and the darkness rushed back in like a living thing. The water returned to black. The night returned to silence, the terrible, suffocating silence. I stood there on the deck of the Sarah's memory, bleeding, shaking, and unable to move. My engine was still running. I could hear it, steady and rhythmic beneath me. The stars were starting to show through the clouds again. The sky was returning to its normal black, but something inside had broken, not physically, spiritually. Something had cracked open in my soul, and I knew, with a certainty no amount of logic could ever touch, that what I'd felt down there in the deep, aware, it was conscious, it was thinking, and it had known my dead wife's. I didn't trust my hands to start for shore immediately. I sat in the captain's chair, wrapped in a blanket I kept below deck, and I waited for dawn. Sleep? I couldn't. I just watched the water and listened to the engine and tried to convince myself that what had happened was real. By the time the sun came up, painting the sky pink and gold, I'd made a decision. I was going to cut the engine and start for shore. I was going to forget about those 3 nets. I was going to forget about Hector's story and the green sky and the shape that moved beneath the water, purpose, intelligence. But as I reached for the throttle, I saw something floating about 50 yards off the starboard bow. It was one of my nets. But it wasn't torn or damaged. It was folded, carefully folded, and secured with a knot I didn't recognize, a knot that looked almost deliberate, almost like a message. And hanging from the net, like ornaments on a Christmas tree, were dozens of fish, beautiful silver fish, the kind that sold for premium prices, enough to pay for a month of fuel and supply. Someone or something had caught those fish and deliberately placed them in my net, deliberately arranged them, deliberately left them for me to find. I sat there in the rising dawn, staring at that impossible gift, and I understood that I had crossed over into I couldn't uncross. The sea had chosen me for something, just didn't know what. I never told anyone about that night, not the harbor master, not the fisherman at McGillicuddy's, not even the priest when I went to confession the following Sunday. Father Mitchell would have thought I'd lost my mind, and maybe I had. Maybe I still have. What I did tell people was that I'd had a good night of fishing, really good, caught more than I had in months. The silver fish sold well at the market, so well that I used the money to repair the Sarah's Memories engine and buy new equipment. For a few weeks, life felt almost normal. Every night, I'd lie in bed in a small in the harbor, and I'd hear that, not with my ears, in my mind, that deep, resonant moan from the depths. And sometime, on the edge of sleep, Sarah, always Sarah. 3 weeks after that first night, I went back out. I don't know why. I'd promised myself I wouldn't. I'd told myself that whatever was down there, whatever wanted my attention, I'd given it enough. But the pull was too strong. It was like having a fish hook embedded in your heart, and the other end of the line was attached to something at the bottom of the ocean, slowly, inexorably reeling me in. The night was clear. No strange greens. The stars were bright, and there was a decent breeze. I took the Sarah's memory out to roughly the same spot, maybe a mile north. My hands were shaking as I prepared 2 nets. Just 2 this time. I'd learned my lesson about 3. I didn't have to wait long. Within an hour, both nets went down and were seized with that same impossible force. But this time, I didn't panic. This time, I was almost expecting it. I secured the lines and simply waited. The boat tilted, the water began to glow that eerie blue-green, and the shape moved beneath me. Larger, if that was possible, more defined. I thought could almost the outline of an eye. The nets were released. One contained fish, beautiful and perfect. The other contained something else, a ring. My wife's wedding ring. I'd buried Sarah with it on her finger. I'd watched them lower the casket into the ground myself, and I'd thrown a handful of dirt on top of it. There was no possible way, no logical explanation for how that ring had ended up in my net, pulled from the ocean floor. I held it in my trembling hand and understood something terrible. Whatever was down there wasn't just aware. It was connected to me, to my past, to my grief. Over the next month, I went out 4 more times. Each time, the ritual was the same. The nets were pulled, the boat tilted, the water glowed, and each time I received a gift, a piece of my past, a shell Sarah had collected on our honeymoon, a photograph of the 2 of us somehow preserved despite years in salt. A small wooden box she kept her sewing supplies in. The other fishermen noticed I was going out more often. They noticed I was catching more than anyone else. Tommy at McGillicuddy's asked me about it one night, leaning across the bar with that curious look. And "You found a new spot?" he asked. Something like that. Nursing. "Must be something special out the way you keep going back, the way you look when you come in." I didn't answer. What could I? That the sea had taken my wife and then given me pieces of her back one by one, that every night I heard her name whisper in the wind, that I wasn't sure anymore where the line between grief and madness. That last trip came on a cold December. I knew that it would be the last. Feel it in my bone, the way you feel a storm coming before the sky changes. I took 3 nets with me. I'd learned enough by then to understand that the number mattered. The 4th net I found waiting for me at the mooring. I'd never seen it before, but somehow I knew it was meant for me. It was old, weathered, made from a kind of material I didn't recognize. There was a weight to it, presence, like it was alive. I lowered all 4 into the water. This time, when the nets were seized, I didn't let them go. I held on to the lines, feeling the incredible tension, the raw power of whatever lived in those depths. My hands bled. My shoulders screamed in protest. Sweat poured down my face despite the freezing night air. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. The tension released. The boat righted it. The water glowed one final time, brighter than ever before, and the shape rose closer to the surface it ever had. I saw it. Not clearly. I'll never be able to describe exactly what I saw in a way that makes sense. But I saw enough. I saw something vast and ancient and impossibly intelligent. I saw something that had been waiting in the deep for longer than my lifetime, longer than my nation, maybe longer than human memory. And in that moment, I understood what it was showing me. It was showing me that grief doesn't die. It doesn't disappear into the past. It lives, eternal and patient, in the deep places of the world. It waits, it remembers, it reaches up from the darkness and touches us with cold, gentle hands, reminding us of what we've lost. When I hauled in those 4 nets, the last one, the ancient one, contained a single object, a mirror, old and ornate, its surface somehow still reflective despite years in the ocean. I picked it up with shaking hands and looked into it. I saw my own face, aged and weathered, marked by decades of sun and salt and sorrow, but I also saw something else. For just a moment, I saw Sarah looking back at me from behind my own reflection. Not a ghost, not a vision, just a presence, an acknowledgement. The sun rose that morning, and I never went back. That was in 1987. It's 1998 now, and I'm sitting here on my porch watching the harbor. The Sarah's memory is still moored at her place, but I don't take her out anymore. The other fishermen think I retired because of my age. They don't know the truth. The truth is that the giant of the chains never stopped existing. It never will. It lives in the deep, and it waits. It waits for the grieving. It waits for the lost. It waits for men like me who need to be reminded that some things, some people, are never truly gone. They're just waiting in the darkness, patient, eternal, ready to reach up and touch us one more time. I never saw that shape again, never heard that whisper, never received another gift. But sometimes, on cold nights, when the wind comes off the water, I swear I still hear it. Not a sound exactly, more like a memory of a sound echoing in the chambers of my heart. People ask me if it was real, if I actually saw something impossible out there on the water. I always give them the same, I don't know. Does it matter? The sea doesn't care about our definitions of real and unreal. The sea cares about truth, and the truth is this: we carry our loved ones with us always, in the deep places we don't talk about, in the dark waters of our own soul. Sometimes, if we're brave enough or foolish enough to venture into those depths, they reach. That's the real lesson of the giant of the chains. It's not about catching the uncatchable or conquering the unconquerable. It's about understanding that the sea and grief and love and loss, they're all the same thing. Vast, eternal, patient. They wait for us in the darkness, and they never, ever let go. I'm an old man now. My hands shake when I tie knots, and my eyes aren't what they used to be. But I still have that mirror. I keep it on the shelf above my fireplace where I can see it every day. I never look into it anymore. I don't need to. I already know it's looking back. The sea teaches us that grief is not something to be conquered or forgotten. It is a living force, as eternal and powerful as the ocean. The men and women we love do not disappear when they die. They become part of the deep places within us, reaching up through our memories to remind us that love transcends even death. We must learn to sorrow, to respect it, the way we respect the sea. Only then can we find peace, not by forgetting, by understanding that we are forever connected. If this story touched your heart, I ask you to do 2 things. Subscribe to this channel so you don't miss the next tale from an old fisherman, and leave a like if you believe that some mysteries are worth keeping. The sea keeps its secret, but it always rewards the faithful. Thank you for listening.